The so-called election that's going to happen on Sunday is basically a selection because all of the candidates that are allowed to run in the so-called election on Sunday are being handpicked by Beijing. Basically, they're being heavily vetted by national security agencies in Hong Kong, and they have to pledge their allegiance to the Beijing CCP instead of pledging their allegiance to the city or the city system. So in general, no matter what kind of vote the voters are actually going to cast, it's not going to make any differences because these candidates are already being handpicked and selected by Beijing. So whoever gets so-called elected in the coming up election, they will not be representative at all. And all of those who actually receive mandate from the citizens of Hong Kong, they're all being locked up or being charged under national security law right now. So there's actually no one that can actually represent the citizens of Hong Kong right now. So this is basically not a genuine election as we will understand it, and boycotting is the only way to go.
Well, what do you think the voter turnout will be like?
I think the voter turnout will be extremely low this year because I have never actually seen my friends or my colleagues that are still in Hong Kong ever be less interested in an election. We all know that these people who are allowed to run an election is not going to be representative at all because they cannot represent the interests of Hong Kongers. I think from the 2019 district council election and from the primary election that is being held by the Pan Democratic Camp in Hong Kong, we can see that majority of the Hong Kong is actually in supportive of the movement and will not tolerate human rights violation. But under national security law and the new electoral system, like voting for those who actually can represent us is not possible anymore. So I don't think people would be interested in voting in that sense.
So if pro-Beijing candidates are all but assured, why does the Communist Party care if people come out to vote or not?
Because the turnout rate of a so-called election is a language that all of the democratic countries speaks. That is, if there's a high turnout rate, then Beijing can create this false sense of legitimacy for themselves and saying that the majority of the Hong Kong people actually support them and want the national security law and want Beijing to intervene so as to bring back prosperity and stability to the city. But with a low turnout rate, this kind of lie cannot stand, and they will not be able to create this sense of illusion that Hong Kongers are actually in support of the law and in support of the Beijing authorities.
Well, police have warned Hong Kongers that it's illegal to urge others not to vote. Are people scared, worried? How are they feeling?
I think there are people who are actually afraid of this kind of threatening because you are not sure about if you saying that you're not going to vote will lead you into trouble, and that's very understandable. And the police or authorities have actually arrested people who actually shared this kind of callings on social media saying that they actually violated certain laws in Hong Kong. And so I do understand why people are afraid, but there are still people who said, I don't feel like it's wrong to ask people to not to vote on that day because this is not an election, and still continue to call for that action online. I think as an activist overseas, I think I can't say if they should or should not, but in my personal opinion, I think boycotting is a good thing to do this time.
And Glacier, so many forms of protest are essentially outlawed now. How else do you think Hong Kongers will make their voices heard?
I think there are still a lot of things happening, even though they're not as visible as they were in 2019. For example, last week when Chow Hang-tong, Gwyneth Ho, and Jimmy Lai were convicted for the June 4th case in 2020, they actually made their mitigation into a speech that's actually conveying political messages, and people are able to read about it even though it doesn't get translated very well into the global community. And at the same time, there are journalists, there are documentary makers, there are a lot of different stakeholders in the society still trying to do their job and still trying to protect the freedom of speech that's left in Hong Kong. So I would say that there are still a lot of things happening, but they're just not as visible as we would see in 2019 and 2020.
And what has Chief Executive Carrie Lam said in the lead up to the vote, and what do you make of her words?
She actually said that there is a chance that people don't go out and vote because they're so content with the government. I think this is just complete nonsense in a way that if citizens would be very eager to vote if they find that those people that actually represent them and play a part in politics that would improve their lives, improve their livelihood. But in this case, we don't actually have that kind of people running in the so-called election that's coming up on Sunday. And I think Carrie Lam is just trying to make herself look better, even if the turnout rate is really low this year. She would have to make up excuses and make sure that she doesn't like take that blow very, very harshly in a way, because she will be held accountable for by Beijing, because she would be the one who is supposed to be making turnout rate high in Hong Kong, but she would fail definitely.
And finally, Glacier, how will you be marking the election come Sunday from Hamburg?
And for me, I think I will spend Sunday remembering my friends and colleagues who are now behind bars for running in the primary election in 2020, because I was back in Hong Kong in 2020 helping some of the candidates running their election campaign for their pro-democratic primary and for the actual election that was supposed to happen in September 2020. So the day actually mean a lot to me. Like, I have imagined different versions of an election day in Hong Kong. How would that look like? But none of those imagination would actually come true anymore, because my candidates are behind bars. And I do hope that the government would release them and we will have genuine democratic elections in the future.
Glacier Kwong, a really important weekend ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you.